Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tigers Down Under. We've got lots to get through this week, and with me to dissect it all, I've got Logan.
Good evening, everybody.
It's a pretty sad state of affairs we'll start with, which is the loss to Chelsea this morning, but probably more importantly, well, definitely more importantly than the game, is the sorry state of Ryan Mason, who early reports seem to indicate was fighting for his life after the game this morning, suffering a fractured skull from a contest in the air with Gary Cahill. Later reports from the club especially cleared that up and said that he's basically in a stable condition. He's had surgery on his skull and is now expected to recover and be released in the next few days. And I guess, Logan, the biggest positive out of that is that comment that he'll be released in the next few days, which does suggest it's hopefully not too major an injury.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I guess we send our thoughts and prayers to the Mason family and the whole City faithful in general. But yeah, first, when those initial newspaper reports came out, it looked incredibly serious. And whilst we're not undercutting the severity of the injury, it does appear, particularly with City's press release, that he will in fact be okay. And whether that looks like a return to the football field and in the not too distant future or not is yet to be seen. But yeah, first and foremost, the fact that he seems as if he'll be okay is the most important news that we get out of that, of course.
I couldn't stay up and watch the live game because it was such an awkward time before work. So I was actually watching the game on demand on the train into work, and so it was a bit weird when I finished watching the game that was when the reports were coming through about his condition. So it was almost as soon as the game finished, I was hearing these updates, and it was a bit surreal because suddenly all of these football clubs and all of these football associations around the world were sending their thoughts about Ryan Mason and for instance the Socceroos from our end, which was quite touching, and it does sort of underline the severity that we found Ryan in this morning, and yeah, very thankful that it seems to be that the worst is behind him.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I was unfortunate enough to wake up at such an ungodly hour and catch the collision. And I think Alan Shearer kind of mentioned it on Match of the Day as well, that everyone at the ground kind of had an immediate understanding for just how severe the incident was, and they reacted duly as well. So it was a nice touch from the Chelsea fans to respond in the way they did. And yeah, obviously, when you see the medical staff arrive in such kind of angst, yeah, the message was pretty clear that something serious had gone down.
And it was quite fortunate that I think it was Hernandez or it might have been Huddleston or both who actually held him down when he tried to get back to his feet because having had minor injuries in comparison, minor head injuries in comparison, I know that the first instinct is to sort of try and stand up and kind of shake it off, but that's absolutely the worst thing to do. So it was great that there were a few players nearby who knew exactly what was going on and knew to sort of restrain him until the medical staff got there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think even more importantly, from a city's perspective, particularly from what the press release suggests, is the care that was taken for Ryan Mason straight after the incident, thanking all involved and saying that he was afforded the best possible treatment. Given the circumstances, I think that is, again, just another positive icing on the cake, so to speak, in a very horrible circumstance indeed.
Absolutely. One interesting thing out of it in terms of Gary Cahill staying on the pitch was I thought he looked quite groggy coming off the incident as well, and I think Conte wanted him to go off at half time, but he insisted on staying on. And it's interesting that, I mean, in Aussie rules and NRL, I think as well, here in Australia, they have the concussion rule that players have to go off and pass a concussion test before they're allowed to continue. And I'm actually quite surprised that they don't have something similar in such a big league with players who are so expensive and worth so much money, especially that they don't have that level of care potentially for the players. Obviously, it would become tricky in terms of what you do when the player's off the field, whether the team's allowed another substitute to come on or something like that. But I think with this increasing focus on concussion and the issues that head injuries can cause, that it certainly would have been prudent to. I mean, he may well have been able to come back on, but it would have been prudent to at least make sure that he didn't have a concussion.
Yeah, exactly. It's an interesting one, and I think it's probably more of a case of it will happen over time. It's inevitable. The more research that kind of gets done on brain injuries and whatnot, it's only natural that it will find its way into the Premier League. But Yeah, an interesting point. It's definitely one that does surprise me with the level of competition in the Premier League and the worldwide exposure that it does attract. The fact that they haven't got anything set in stone for concussion laws, etc., is quite surprising.
Yeah, so our thoughts and prayers are with Ryan Mason and his family at this time, and we hope he makes a speedy recovery. We'll move on to slightly brighter news, and that's the actual game. Not that there was much to smile about in the game itself either, with a 2-0 loss to Chelsea, but there was a lot to take out of the performance, would you say? I mean, in the first half, we kind of showcased the best of our defensive efforts, and in the second half, coinciding with an injury to Davies, we sort of switched formation and we really put some pressure on Chelsea.
Look, it feels like a broken record in some respects when we talk about the City performance. We kind of sit there and go, oh, they played well, but we didn't end up getting the result. I felt this morning, our time particularly, that effort against Chelsea was probably the strongest kind of group effort that I've seen in one of these kind of fighting losses, if you will. Yeah, as you mentioned, the scoreline didn't go our way, but the feel from watching the game live was just there seemed to be a kind of a tenacity that we kind of have been missing in recent times, and a kind of I guess the attitude is we seem to bundle or drop our bundle and nod off for patches. And I just thought, particularly for the first 45 minutes, with the exception of that rather lucky goal that Costa scored, when it kind of went through about 6 people's legs, when he just kind of almost got a little bit lazy and dropped back on his run. City were brilliant, and as you mentioned, the change when Davies did find his way off as well, and the Ash came on, we really did cause them problems. And interesting that Marco Silva went that way, because it almost seemed that defensively he was just going to shore things up. But when I heard Nias was coming on, it was quite surprising, and obviously, and the commentators touched on it as well, that as soon as that change happened, we started causing Chelsea some real problems.
And it's amazing when you look at the match stats. And I mean, in the first half, I think we were giving them about 38% possession for ourselves, and 62% for them, or something similar to that. But I think for most of the second half, we actually dominated possession. I think it was something like 65% to us for large chunks of that second half. And I think we actually had just as many shots as them, with, I think, maybe one less on target. So it's pretty amazing to think that obviously our shots might have been from further out, and Harry Maguire deserves another round of applause for an absolutely outstanding game from himself, and he managed to get a decent shot away as well. But we certainly caused some problems and certainly challenged them. And if we can keep that level up, we'll certainly cause a lot of teams headaches.
And I think the biggest indicator for mine as well was the kind of noise levels at Stamford Bridge, particularly from the Chelsea fans. They were somewhat silenced. And again, the commentators kept touching on it. Just speaking of the manner that City were playing, it just gave them a kind of real unease about everything they did, and kept them nervy right up until, I guess, when Cahill scored that header in the kind of the last 10 minutes. But the fact that we were able to go to Stamford Bridge, particularly we have to remember that it's only the second week under Marco Silva, and to be able to kind of perform in that manner, to show the stamp that he's had on the players in such a relatively short period of time, was really impressive for mine.
It's remarkable how quickly the players seem to have been sold on Marco's style and philosophy in football, and really sort of bought into it, because I know especially with the fact that he prefers to have the players pressing high up the pitch and running a lot more. I think I saw it noted that against Bournemouth was the most we'd run in a match all season. So it's amazing that the players can buy into it so quickly and turn around to that extent. What did you make of the new players? Because obviously 2 of them started the game, with Evandro and El Abdelawi both starting the game in that 3-5-2 formation. I thought El Abdelawi actually looked quite good. I mean, we'd heard coming into the match that he was low on match fitness, and perhaps that showed towards the end. But he certainly's done a job convincing us that perhaps he's the answer to our right-back problems.
What a difference having a natural right-back makes. And I think that it was kind of, whilst it wasn't something that we were unaware of, just to see him slot in there. I was quite surprised to see him start, given the lack of match fitness that was kind of well publicised during the week when he signed. But yeah, I thought he was fantastic. I thought that he looked at home, and Probably didn't offer as much impetus kind of going forward. And he described himself as an overlapping fullback that likes to get in behind, similar to what we have in Robertson. You probably wouldn't expect it to be like that as much, given it that it's his first game playing at Stamford Bridge, lower match fitness. But I'm really looking forward to seeing what he kind of produces in the next couple of weeks. But I thought he was fantastic. Yassi, when he came on, was great. But for mine, Evandro was the pick of the bunch. I thought that he looked fantastic on the ball. And I saw this week when he was labelled a playmaker. I know there was a lot of kind of scepticism when links to failed playmakers we have had at City in the past, and I thought that he just looked like he had a sense of composure, and he looked great.
Yeah, Evandro and Huddleston linking up in midfield was great because they both seemed to have so much composure on the ball. And there were a few times where we were sort of bursting forward, and there was the option for a pass forward, which I thought was looking likely to be intercepted, and either Huddleston or Evandro would just slip one off to one or the other to keep the move going and keep the momentum building without actually threatening to lose the ball, which was great to see. Who would you say stands out as your man of the match?
Oh, I still think of Andrew. I think obviously he was fantastic, and you've already touched on Harry Maguire, who was, well, he was probably in a league of his own this morning.
I'll read out some of the stats for Maguire. He had 100% of his take-ons were successful. He won 8 aerial duels, he made 8 interceptions, 7 clearances, and he won 5 tackles.
You kind of pinch yourself every time Harry Maguire gets on the ball now, because you know that in his head he still doesn't necessarily consider himself that your fundamental centre back. Even the way he took on 2 or 3 players to whip that missed shot, which ended up earning us a corner. He just seems to pop up everywhere, and for such a big frame, even though we should be used to seeing it by now, it still kind of shocks you.
Yeah.
He was just fantastic. I agree. Harry Maguire, a couple of long-range efforts as well that we're kind of starting to become accustomed to. Harry's game had it all, and he's quite a cult hero already.
And it's amazing. I mean, the commentators, it seems every time we get a new set of commentators, they're amazed at what this guy can produce and what an impact he can have in the game, not just as a defender, but as you say, he loves to go for a run forward, and I'm sure it's only a matter of time before he actually scores one of those goals, because he seems to be getting his shots now on target. He's lowering his eyes a bit and actually getting them in on target, and challenged Courtois on one occasion pretty well. So it's great to see, and look, I mean, if we do end up having to sell him at some point, I would hope that the club holds out and looks at what Stones went for. Obviously, he doesn't have the England caps under his belt just yet, but he certainly would be worth quite a bag, I reckon. We'll move on then, and that's probably a good segue into talking about the transfer market, because there was one notable absentee from the game against Chelsea, whether that was with injury or otherwise. But Robert Snodgrass has been sort of the talk of the town lately in terms of whether we are going to sell him after the departure of Jake, who we'll talk about in a second. What did you make of Snodgrass's absence? I know we were told he had a soft tissue injury, but what do you make of it?
Perhaps one of the most confusing and polarising arguments is whether Robert Snodgrass will still be here at the end of January. You see the forums, people popping up talking about how there's a deal already done at West Ham. But for mine, I just struggle to see how I think the closest deal that we've kind of heard is the latest bid coming from Middlesbrough, which I think was touched on £8 million, which the club rejected. I still feel that if Jake Livermore is going to be sold for £10 million, I think it's still going to take something special to take Snodgrass off our hands and move him on to another club. I don't think that Robert Snodgrass has shown any kind of indication that he wants to move, and Marco Silva echoed that this morning. So I'm still quite hopeful and optimistic that we will still see him at the end of January. And I don't think that he was. There's any kind of reason to believe that he was left out of the squad because a sale is imminent. I'm going to kind of err on the side of caution and hopefully, fingers crossed, say that it was just purely because of injury, as it was suggested.
I just can't fathom why the club would want to sell a player who has had a hand in half of our goals in the Premier League this season and represents probably our best chance of staying up. Because as good as Evandro did play today, his ability at set pieces did leave a bit to be desired, and that may well be just him warming up to playing in England. But it reminded us of what we were missing with Snodgrass, and I can't see Snodgrass being worth any less in the summer or any clubs less interested in him in the summer either. So I'd imagine that Marco would just be turning to Snodgrass and just saying, look, stick with us. If we stay up, then there you go. Still at a Premier League club next season, and we can all reassess in the summer. And if we go down, we'll happily find you a club in the Premier League who wants to buy you because he won't be short of suitors.
That's exactly right. I was going to say the same thing. I thought that you're exactly right. We did miss him this morning from a set piece perspective. And I think that he's not going to do his chances of remaining in the Premier League any harm by staying with us for the next 4 or 5 months because given the form that he's in and given the quality that everybody in the English game, well, and around the world seems to be aware of what he possesses now, he would be incredibly hot property come the end of season. So I don't think he has anything to worry about at all.
One thing that took a bit of getting used to this morning was seeing the number 14 lining up at right back. We've seen the number 14 at centre back, but right back was a little bit of a novelty and reminded us very quickly that football moves on quite quickly with El Abdelawi taking on Jake Livermore's old number. Jake was sold last week while we were recording our podcast, so we didn't get your thoughts on that sale at the time, but what are your thoughts on Jake Livermore's departure, and I guess what's your fondest memory of him?
Timing is everything, and I think that when the podcast did go to air and we got off and we're kind of kicking ourselves, I thought, well, it was meant to be that we were speculating for almost an entire podcast, and then the sale went through. I think on air we kind of suggested that his price would probably be around £12 million. So seeing go for the suggested 10, I thought it was a little bit shy of what we could have couped from him. With that being said, I think that Marco Silva has a plan, and I think that he would have had a much larger say in the Livermore sale. From all reports and the kind of interviews that I've seen of Jake being welcomed at West Brom, he seems quite content to be there. It's obviously a long-term deal on quite a healthy salary as well. So I think that from a personal perspective, I don't think he seemed too unhappy to go, at least on the surface. Maybe
he did, in fairness though, because I have seen a few City fans kind of calling him a snake and various things, which I think is quite harsh. And in fairness to him, I saw a clip of an interview with the West Brom interviewer who asked him about his time at Hull and why he left and stuff. And he did sort of hesitate quite a bit and looked a bit uncomfortable trying to produce the reasons why he left. And it did seem a little bit that he wasn't, he wasn't sort of, falling over himself to make the move.
I think it's very easy for us to forget just how difficult it probably isn't. The last couple of weeks, particularly with all the kind of speculation of the club sale and the unrest that seems to have been there, playing in a thin squad, the fans being divided with the others. There has been a lot going on, and I think we're very naive to suggest that from a player's perspective, that could not in any way affect you. It would have to be getting under his skin. So there may have been an element of, whilst Jake was obviously very close to the playing group and has been identified as definitely a core member, all you have to do is read the tweets from the players wishing him the best and saying how much they'll miss him in the dressing room, kind of makes us aware of the role that he played at City and how important he was to that core group. So I think that whilst he did go under somewhat, let's say, divided reasoning, I think that he will have mixed feelings about being there. Probably looking forward to a new challenge and somewhat a sigh of relief that he no longer needs to deal with the kind of problems that everybody else at Hull City is facing at the moment. But I think that there's definitely an element of kind of excited for the next challenge, but also a little bit sad about what he's left behind.
What would you say was your best memory of his time in the black and amber shirt?
I love the goal that he scored in the dying moments in the come-from-behind win against Reading, I think it was. But he scored that goal with a couple of metres out, just the poke, and then celebrated. I also actually enjoyed him kicking over the camera at West, ironically. Um,
Ironically, at West Brom, yeah, yeah. I think
so
I was in the stands that day as well, so that was a pretty good one as well.
yeah,
Uh,
they're two moments that stand out.
yeah, probably for me, the first ever live City goal that I've seen was his goal against Liverpool in the first of the three goals we scored to win 3-1. It was a pretty deflected effort, but it was still pretty amazing to watch. So that's probably my main memory. Obviously, as well, you know, after all of the hardships he had to face between relegation and coming back in the Championship, seeing him being able to celebrate getting promoted again in the playoff final was a pretty special moment, and obviously would have meant a lot to him after what he had been through. So he goes with our best wishes and a lot of fond memories, and hopefully all the best for him when he's not coming up against City.
Yeah, I could not agree more. We
Uh,
wish him all the best.
yeah, so there's been a few other rumours that have emerged about players we might be interested in signing. And it looks as if we're still being linked to Van der Veer, the right back, who I thought the interest might have ended in once we signed El Abdelawi, but he still seems to be on the radar, at least in some reports. And the other one is kind of out of the blue, which I always find those reports out of the blue to be more likely to be true, just because of how suddenly they can kind of pop up, is Lazar Markovic, who's a Liverpool player but was on loan at Sporting, I believe, for the first half of this season. Sounds as if he's fallen pretty severely out of favour there, and they're looking to end the loan deal. And we're pretty short on wingers, so he might well be someone that Marco Self would be pretty keen to take on loan. Of those two names, which one stands out to you as the one we might be more interested in signing?
I think I would have to agree with you. I think Markovic's probably the one that seems more likely, given the speed that the kind of story's broken. And obviously, for us, it's just speculation that kind of. I think Marco Silva has a plan in his head of what he wants, and I think he's even been quoted in the press as saying that he knows what he wants. Whether the deals can be done or not is another story. But he did mention the kind of need to replace the outgoing signing with Livermore as quickly as possible. So I think Markovic is probably the one that would be more likely at the moment, but I think both of those two would obviously add a large degree to our play. So I'd be very interested to see if any of them sign or perhaps both. I think that'd be great additions.
Yeah, well, we'll have to keep our fingers on the pulse and see what happens. But it sounds as if hopefully we'll be making a few more signings this week to fill out the squad a bit more, especially with Davies now injured as well. It's starting to get a bit thin again. And I tell you what, it would have been handy to have a centre mid who can also stand in as a centre back, considering Mason and Davies were both went off injured in the game against Chelsea. But I guess that's football. We've got the Man United game coming up on this Friday, and we talked about it a little bit on the last podcast, but only in passing. We'll go into it in a bit more detail now because obviously there's a lot riding on this game in terms of making the final of the League Cup. It's looking a bit unlikely at this point, being 2-0 down, but what do you think of our chances of turning it around?
Look, I think it's you've hit the nail on the head. I think it is unlikely, and I think we're very naive to go into that game thinking that a result is very very hopeful. But you just never know. I think if well, I was there on the Boxing Day game against United when we went 2 goals up inside the first 10 minutes, so anything can kind of happen in football, as we know. And I think that an early goal could really kind of heap the pressure on them. I always kind of feared that this would be the undoing of City in the League Cup, was getting one of those bigger teams, so-called bigger teams, over 2 legs. I think that it's more likely if you kind of sneak the home tie and you go for a kind of a smash and grab and you beat them 1-0 or something like that, you march on into the finals. It's happy days. But I think over 180 minutes of football, just given the sheer strike power and attacking options that those clubs have to unlock you kind of, for lack of a better word, you find a lack of want. You can't really use that element of surprise or the kind of sneak and catch them on an off day. They've got more chance to turn around. So I think that it's unlikely, it's possible, but I think, again, we go in with the same nature that we did, the free hit. We play everyone and we see how we go. And if nothing else, just build on the current performances that we've got under Silva, which are evident to the fans a lot more promising than what they were a couple of weeks ago.
On that, then, if you're suggesting that it's hard to keep up that desire and focus over that 180 minutes, is it a positive? Do you think? I mean, we've made 4 signings, I think it is, or 3 signings, since the last time we played United. Potentially, there could be a fourth or fifth coming in the next couple of days, hopefully. Which could actually see us sort of rejuvenate the side a little bit since that last leg, and really kind of add an element of surprise against United and unpredictability, perhaps.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I guess whether the unpredictability of the kind of maybe £10 million rated players that I would suggest would be kind of adding to our squad, if any, whether they are of the class to kind of go turn United over is yet to be seen. But again, I think that when Marco Silva took over, he's obviously made it very clear that the Premier League objective, which we all know of staying there, is his priority. And I think that it's more of building a philosophy under him and getting the players to get used to what he expects from them and what they should expect from each other is very different. And I think having a shot in a big game, in a cup semi-final against a big club is obviously a game that all of those players will be kind of chomping at the bit to be involved in. And I think that using those kind of fixtures as a springboard can only be a positive thing for building the culture that he's trying to instill at City at the moment.
Well, that second leg is Friday morning, which unfortunately is the morning after Australia Day, so I'm sure plenty of Aussies will be nursing hangovers as they get up for this one, but it'll be good to see a good big turnout for the second leg of this game, because you never know when the next semi-final or final comes around in a cup, and we say that, and we've been to plenty so far. I think Wembley's pretty much a second home for us. They should just reserve one of the stands for us on a permanent basis, but you never know when the gravy train's going to run out, so got to make the most of these opportunities while we can. We'll talk more broadly about Silva just quickly before we round out to discussing the Fulham game. And I wanted to get your opinion on Silva's start at Hull, because as you say, he's been here for about 2 weeks now. And we've already touched on the fact that his philosophy does seem to have been adopted quite quickly. What have you made of him? We've obviously had a mixed bag of results. We've had the Swansea and Bournemouth wins. We've had the loss to United and now the loss to Chelsea. But what do you make of his transformation of City?
There's a quietness about Marco Silva, which to me shows that he's very calculated, and the fact that he's not as animated as kind of what I think a lot of us began to expect, hearing about this relatively unknown to us Portuguese manager. I think we're expecting a lot of flair, jumping up and down the sideline, some very colourful press conferences, and he kind of is somewhat of anti-climaxed in the sense that he's not like that at all, and he almost kind of scares me in the sense that because he is so quiet and is so calculated, it's almost like he's got this idea in his head, and he does kind of see very deeply and think very deeply beyond what the kind of the surface level of the City fans and perhaps players do. I think that he has a plan in his head of how he expects to play football, how he expects his teams to operate, and obviously the type of football that he expects. All you have to do is look at the signings, such as Evandro coming in, that he kind of chased relatively quickly. And looking on paper, I saw Evandro getting slated for not being part of the Porto first team and the speed of the Premier League he wouldn't be able to handle. But then we see him go to Chelsea, and obviously he shows a real kind of tenacity that is somewhat been missing from the midfield, in the sense that we've got the tenacity, but maybe don't hold on to the ball as well. Yeah. I don't think there was any chance of any kind of fluke that we were able to take a greater share of the possession in the second half because of the philosophy that Marco Silva plays. Also, the kind of the speed and impotence in defence to get out and put pressure on those Chelsea wingers, and didn't really give them the time to be a threat and put those balls in the box. Really just kind of, to me, stamped the authority of the way that he plays, and the fact that he plays without fear, and the players kind of go out with an urgency that I think we were missing under Phelan. And he has been just really, really impressive so far, and I'm looking forward to seeing if over the next couple of weeks, if he continues to build on the things that he's coming. But from early impressions, he has really changed the kind of the landscape of how we've been lately, and given something for the fans to get excited about.
And then, from your point of view, how many more players do you think he would need to sign to sort of complete this transformation? Because obviously, not all of the players are suited to that fast-paced, fast-tempoed game style of his. Huddleston seems to be doing quite well at the moment, but you can imagine that if he's not able to press as fast and hard as Silva wants, that he might struggle to play every single game. So, especially with injuries to Mason and Davies, you might be looking for a bit more depth. But I mean, from my point of view, I could see perhaps another striker, a winger, and probably a centre mid as depth coming into the team. So probably three more signings. But what's your take on it, and which players do you think? Well, what positions do you think we need to focus on filling?
Yeah, I think three more would be just about right. And also we have to remember that Mbakani and El Mohammadi are due back from the African Cup of Nations shortly as well. And I think that once they come back into the squad and kind of bolster his options, I think all of the positions that you've mentioned are kind of the glaring ones. I think that a right back or right back half as well for Abdelawi as well would not be, wouldn't fall on deaf ears. Any kind of competition and opportunities to kind of tinker with his squad, especially we saw El Mohammadi perhaps getting moved further up the pitch, also Josh Tyman getting moved further up the pitch. All of those things adding those extra players in gives him kind of the opportunity to tinker with his squad and play with the positional roles and try and cause teams problems in different ways that we perhaps don't expect. So yeah, look, I think three more would be ideal, and I think that a striker would probably be the number one thing on the list, with the exception of obviously that the midfield bolstering that with the absence of Livermore now is desperately needed.
Well, we'll finish off then with a discussion of our FA Cup venture against Fulham, which will be early Sunday night our time, so it's a quick turnaround from the United game Friday morning. We come up against a couple of old players, and funnily enough, two of my first City shirts in Kearney and Aluko, both playing quite well for Fulham at the moment. I think Kearney might have just won Goal of the Month or something similar for Fulham for one of his efforts, so he's certainly come on in leaps and bounds for Fulham. What's your take on this game? Is this sort of a game to rest the main players and just sort of give the youngsters a bit of a go, or is cup progression still firmly on the agenda?
I think that Marco Silva will again be building on that philosophy that he's trying to instill a culture and a playing mentality or a winning mentality. And I would be very surprised to see, whilst there will be some squad rotation, I think he will still play a relatively strong squad. I hope that he doesn't, because I would hate to see us progress in the FA Cup, given the kind of the run in home and particularly the league table position that we're sitting in. I would not be too sad at all to see us bundled out by lowly ranked Fulham. But I think that from a fan's perspective, obviously the Aluko Carney reuniting can only be an exciting thing. And I'm very interested to see what Silva does with the squad. But I wouldn't be surprised to see a few of the academy guys or the youngsters get the nod.
And I just saw an interesting stat just before we started recording that it's appropriately a year ago today we beat Fulham 1-0 to go top of the championship, which I think from memory was a Hernandez penalty just before half time in a game where Fulham generally looked the better team. But we seem to have that sort of record against Fulham of late. I think the last time we lost to them was back in the 09-10 season. But since then, I mean, even going 2-0 down to them in the 13-14 season, and inspired by Long and Jelavic to both score to give us a 2-2 draw at the end of that one, as well as obviously the 6-0 trouncing that season as well. We've had a few pretty decent results against them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We are somewhat of a bogey team for them, brother, if you will, despite probably being a much more fancied squad than what they have. But they're ruffling some feathers in the championships. I think they're just outside the playoff positions and have, by all accounts, been playing some quite decent football. So I think that it's certainly not a fixture that we would look at and expect to walk away with comfortably. I think that they're going to give us a very stern test indeed.
What would be your score prediction for this one?
I'm still going to fancy us. Obviously, depending on the squad selection, I think that will play a huge role. But I'm going to say City 2-1.
I'm going to go with... Yeah, actually, to be fair, it'll probably be 2-1, or even, you know what, it might be 3-2, because I'm sure Aluko and Kenny will both get goals. But I could see us winning that one. I can't can't quite see us dropping off against Fulham. I've also heard that there are plans to basically sell out our away allocation against Fulham as sort of the reverse boycott that we had against Swansea, which would be great to see. It'd be great to fill out Craven Cottage, which is a good little ground to go to down in London. So hopefully City fans can all get there and sing their hearts out. But thanks so much for joining me, Logan. There was lots to get through.
Yeah, not a problem.
And thank you everyone for listening in. Once again, we'll reiterate that our thoughts and prayers are with Ryan Mason. We hope he makes a speedy recovery. And on a football side of things, hopefully we can bounce back and get a couple of good wins in both cup competitions. So until next time, come on City! You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
There's no turning back 'cause you're out.